Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 5, Charades. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Strange New Worlds, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 5. If you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, regardless of what I said about the time travel episode 3, I did, in case you didn't see the update I did in episode 4, I did up my rating for that episode. So I will say that this episode, episode 5, is definitely my least favorite of the season. This is a comedy episode in the same vein as Spock Amok, and although I did really like Spock Amok, I did not really like this one. I think this was kind of a pale comparison. It's kind of reminding me of TNG Season 2, and I think there's other examples, but how they just did, oh, here's another Roxanne Troy episode. They did Man Trap, which was actually way worse than... it felt just like they're treading the same ground, but doing a lesser job at it. And I feel like they're trying to write off T'Pring, because we didn't really see her much in Season 2, and at the end of this episode she's at odds with Spock, so they might just be trying to sort of write her off. And she barely appeared in this episode too, which also makes me think they're trying to write her off. They're more focusing on the Spock Nurse Chapel connection, which I don't like. It's not because I'm a canon Hulk, although it totally defies canon. It's just, it does, but it's not. I mean, they should have just named this character something else. That was someone else. That would have went a whole. It's just hard for my mind to connect that these are the same characters in the original series. So we had Nurse Chapel having this, ridiculous crush on Spock, and constantly, oh, Mr. Spock, oh, here's some soup, Mr. Spock, oh, Mr. Spock, and Spock being like, I am too logical, I do not care about this, please do not advance. It's just these things don't fit. And I heard some theories they're going to do something like Spock getting his mind erased or some bullshit, losing memories or something to try to make it fit. And that, to me, is going to feel like, Pike in Season 2 of Discovery saying, oh, rip those hologram emitters off the Enterprise. Let's just go a rail against how dumb that was. And I think if they tried to course correct with something like this, it would feel more like that. In other words, dumb. I suppose if Nurse Chapel is called something else, then maybe I wouldn't be bothered so much by their relationship. But it's not. That's what they called her, and it just doesn't fit. And again, I am not a canon Hulk. I am definitely not. I'll fight anyone who says I am. There's plenty of, retcons and stuff that Strange New Worlds and Discovery does that other true canon Hulks whine and complain about that. I was like, oh, shut up. It's actually good writing, so I don't care. This is not so much good writing, and it's just too much of a break for me to do, so because my brain just goes trying to fit these and say that these are the same characters and not. But talking about this episode specifically, just disregarding that whole Nurse Chapel thing, this is like a really cliche, dumb sitcom trope that I'm just sick of seeing, and I don't think they did a pretty good job. Now that's the difference with Spock Amok, because with that episode they used the body swap trope, but I thought they did a really good job with it. I thought Strange New Worlds Season 1 was hitting out of the park. They would take these, what should sound like on paper like a dumb cliche idea, and doing really good things with them, whereas this time it felt like, oh, let's just do that again, but they weren't as successful as they were the first time. And in fact, they, to be honest, and this is just my personal opinion, I think the, asshole step parent trying to impress not step parent, parent-in-law, trying to impress the asshole parent-in-law is a trope I think is way worse than the body swap trope. I hate this trope, and I don't think they didn't really do anything original or creative with it. They just did, oh, here's this trope. So, and I didn't really buy Spock as a human. Like, I think that whole... I mean, I didn't hate it. There's some moments in it I thought were funny. How they made a comparison to him as being a teenager. So I think if they took this storyline in a different direction and didn't simply just do the, trying to impress the asshole in-laws storyline, then maybe I could have liked it. Then it's not like the whole concept or the execution of Spock behaving like a human was terrible. It's just what they did with it, and I don't know. It was, as I said, it was as is in this episode. It was too silly for me. Like, I think they could have took it in a very similar direction and liked it had the plot been better, had the character stories been better. They had this episode not simply devolved into, oh, let's impress the in-laws. And this episode reminded me so much of the DS9 episode You Are Accordingly Invited, the wedding episode in Deep Space Nine with where Jadzia marries Worf, because that whole, and I didn't really like that episode either, and that whole storyline was again Jadzia trying to impress like Martok's wife, because Worf is part of House Martok, so she, by marrying Worf she was joining House Martok, and she was being a total super huge asshole to Jadzia the whole episode. But at least the one thing I will give this episode over that one is at the end of that episode, she just for no reason was like, you know what, I was wrong about you, Jadzia, you impressed me, which wasn't fucking earned at all. And at least they didn't have T'Pring's mother do, you know what, Spock, you've taught me a thing or two about humans. So at least they didn't do that. I will give them credit for that. But also, I don't like the portrayal of Vulcans as like bigots. And like a lot of people, and rightfully so, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people rightfully so point out, how McCoy was being such a huge bigot towards Spock during the original series, like, you green-blooded Vulcan, all these racial slurs and constantly. But there's also a lot of other examples, particularly in Enterprise, but also in the original series, and maybe a little bit sprinkled in TNG DS9 Voyager, where Vulcans would be outright bigots to humans. And actually, Spock would also fight back against McCoy and also be a bigot sometimes and talk about how much humans suck. But that was a bit more acceptable because he was being ragged on by McCoy the whole time. But still, and here they even bring back the whole Enterprise thing about how Vulcans think humans stink. I never liked that in Enterprise, and I don't think they needed to bring that one back. I think that's something that should be buried to history. They should just say that the Vulcans took some vaccines or medication that helped them. Here they were saying that Spock had to like block his whole sense of smell entirely, because he was being around humans, which yeah, so I would rather not. But T'Pring's mother is just a total bigot. Now, to be fair, it's a bit more acceptable because it's not saying all Vulcans are like that. Like, they were considering Nurse Chapel, even though they rejected her, they were considering her to Vulcan Academy, even though she's human. And And of course, there's Sarek, who married a human, but apparently he's getting a lot of, people thumbing their nose and looking down on him in high society because he dared to marry a human and have a child who's half human. And they did touch on this Discovery. It was actually one of the more interesting episodes of Discovery where it's revealed that Sarek tried to get Michael Burnham into this academy, but they were like, oh, well, you can choose between your half-human son or your adoptive human daughter. We can't take them both as too many humans. And again, that's showing how fucking big Vulcan society is. So the more... but when it got into all the bigotry that Amanda had to put up with living in Vulcan, again, it's like... I don't know, it bothers me when they betray Vulcans as so goddamn bigoted. They're part of the Federation. They're like huge allies with the humans. Now, I can take the one mother-in-law who's just a bigoted old grandma, sure. Like, they exist in human culture, they'll exist in Vulcan culture. But to have, like, the entire society be bigoted towards humans is kind of annoys me. But again, they didn't fully portray that in this episode, but they were leaning that way, and that bothered me whenever they do. And even like that baseball episode in Deep Space Nine, when you had the whole starship Vulcan crew on a Starfleet vessel, and they're all bigoted towards humans. Like, I hated that. Hate. Show some bigotry, yes, but don't make it all like all Vulcans are like that. I just think it's dumb. And it doesn't really fit into... There's supposed to be a Federation world. What's with all the freaking bigotry? Anyway. So that aspect of the episode I didn't like. And the whole... hijinks shenanigans. Oh, he's really human, but he has to put on Vulcan ears and pretend to be a Vulcan. Is the absolute wrong direction to take this Spock turning human into. That is just such a sitcom BS trope. Oh, let's impress the in-laws at the dinner. And I think the ending where T'Pring is like, well, I don't think we should take a break. I don't think we should be around each other anymore. Because Spock didn't let her in on the... And that felt off to me. That felt wrong. And it makes me... Because I feel like they've portrayed Spock and T'Pring, even though it is breaking canon, they portrayed Spock and T'Pring in season 1 as this power couple who really understood each other. But here, I get the sense that they shouldn't be a couple, that she doesn't really understand Spock, and that she's being unreasonable. And of course, this actually goes more in line with canon, but not with the previous season. She's all of a sudden acting in a different character. But I think maybe, and I could be wrong, maybe they're going to prolong this, her sort of not liking Spock, and it's what's going to build up, and they're going to build it up to what happens in Amok Time, where she flat out rejects him and takes this other dude instead. So I'm fine with them leading up to that because it's a fit into canon. But I don't know. I thought it was very clunky. They should have came up with a better reason why she would reject Spock, because she's seeming very unreasonable, and I don't think it's consistent with her character in season 1. Because when Spock says, well, I saw how stressed out you were for having to deal with your mother, so that I didn't want to put that extra burden on you. Yeah! I mean, you may still disagree with his decision to not tell him and be like, well, you should have told me anyway, Spock. That's fair. But to be like, well, I don't think I can be around you. We should take a break because of this, is an overreaction. And I don't think it fits with their character in season 1. I didn't like that. And this is a whole scene of them being like, oh, we're Vulcans, and just like berating humans the whole time and doing it to Amanda's face as well. It did, to be fair, I guess I should start to get into things I did like about this episode, because there were some. So I jumped straight to the ending. That's because I wanted to start with the things I didn't like. But I did like when Spock revealed that he was human, and he was like, I've been human. You think a human would never be able to do this, but I was a human this whole time. But he said it in a way to be like, to show appreciation for his mother, to realize what his mother went through, because this is something the original series he always like sort of rejected. Well, he never really rejected his mom. He would just mention, oh, I have a human mother, but he never really like spoke ill of her. And so this makes sense, and this became before that he's realizing like what she went through, and just having that part of her himself, that heritage from her, is something he appreciates. That is something that the original series kind of denied, though. And Spock always seemed to, as I said, be, put down humans and be like, oh, that's like a human thing. Or Kirk was like, oh, that's a very human thing of you, Spock. He's like, I see no need for insult. Like, how's it insulting you to acknowledge your heritage from your mother that you love? But anyway, I'm getting off track here. But this episode shows him, like, that moment shows him they're really appreciating her and what she's been through, and I thought that was a good moment. I like that moment, even though we had to get the dumbest cliche of cliche sitcom trope in order to get there. It was still a good moment. And I gotta admit, when they were trying to delay, and Pike was and Amanda were sort of feeding off each other. Oh, we have to do this Earth custom. Oh yes, what is the Earth custom? Oh yes, the very significant Earth custom of charades. What am I? That was funny. I will admit that was one of the few moments of this episode I actually found fun, because for the most part I didn't find this episode funny, and I didn't find it like annoying the way I would say Ferengi episodes of Deep Space Nine was actively bothering me when they were trying to be funny. I just didn't laugh. I just didn't really particularly find it that funny, except for a few moments here and there. Like, that was a big one for me. And also, yeah, like the whole Pike trying to help out or whatever. The one thing I didn't really like, though, was, I kind of found it funny and annoying at the same time, was T'Pring's father, I guess, who, T'Pring's mother's husband. I assume it's her father. But the way he was all goofy and like, oh yes, let me have some of that more food. And then the mother would be like, no, this food is not acceptable. He's like, yes, correct. This food is not acceptable. like he would just, he was kind of goofy, and sometimes he came off as like un-Vulcan like in that regard, just so they could make this silly. Again, that's another, I found it kind of funny, but again, it's another trope where you have the asshole parent and their spouse is like some goofy person who just bows to them or whatever. So it's a trope I don't like, but it was done it was done okay-ish. It was done acceptable here, where it did get a couple chuckles for me. So let me backtrack to talk about the aliens. Like, this beginning, like, I didn't realize what this episode would be when I came into it, and I saw the sneak peek scene that they showed at the Ready Room last week, and it was the scene where Nurse Chapel and Spock were in the shuttle, and they were encountering this weird vortex thingy that was like a disturbance in space-time continuum. I thought this would lead to a really great episode, to like a very alternate timeline, time travel shenanigans, but it was just simply, oh, let's make Spock human. So it's kind of disappointing after seeing that scene where they went to it, but it was still an interesting concept, and I thought, again, even though I'm not a fan of this Spock-Chapel connection, I did like somewhat of how they were playing it in this episode, particularly when Nurse Chapel found out that Spock diverted all the shields to her to save her, and this goes in line with earlier when he was desperate to save her life, and he tries to dismiss it. Oh, it's because I'm a Vulcan, I can withstand it. That's bullshit. And how awkward they were around each other, and she was like, "It feels like you've been ignoring me." He's like, "Oh, here's some scans I have to do." He's like, "What? Me ignoring you? Oh, some scans. Let me just go over here and get away from you now." Yeah, so that I kind of like that. I like the weird interdimensional aliens that was kind of like bad customer service reps. Again, that maybe wouldn't work in a serious episode, but the fact that this episode was trying to be comedic, I did think that was kind of funny. I was like, "Oh, your situation is resolved now," and they just hang up and go away. And then Chapel has to go and get their attention and they're like, "Oh no, the situation's resolved now, everything's fine." And they're like, "No, don't hang up on me again, situation's not okay." It's funny that they were able to give her like some medicine to give to Spock, but I don't know. It was a bit, it was an interesting concept, but I think they could have done something more, like something better with it had they gone a serious route rather than just the interdimensional customer service reps. But it's also kind of funny, that concept, at the same time. So that's another thing I will give this episode. And by the way, I mentioned Amanda. It's great seeing her again, giving the same actor who played her in Discovery as returning. And as I said, I liked the scene where she came on board and Spock had that beanie on, and she was like, "What's with the hat?" And it's like, "This is standard Starfleet issue." Like, that was a pretty funny scene. And then when I think they kind of overdid it with the montage though of Spock being human, where he was like laughing hysterically at the joke. Like, that reminded me of, like, I don't know. Trying to think of examples. There's some examples of someone like awkwardly. Oh, Tuvok. That's what it reminded me of. There's an episode in Voyager, I think called Workforce, where Tuvok lost his memory and was planted with another memory, and he was like laughing hysterically at a joke, and he was like making a fool out of himself. He was like, "Oh, that's very funny," and the guy who told the joke was like, "Not really. It wasn't that funny." That's what it reminded me of. Which, yeah. I didn't really like that, and then the whole thing of smelling and eating the bacon and going crazy with the bacon, like that whole montage, I wasn't a huge fan of. Now, I did kind of like the moment, and this was ruined in the trailer for me, where they had Ortega's number one, Leon, and Uhura all talking to Spock and trying to tell him what he sounds like. And he's like, "That is not really what I sound like." And they're like in unison, like, "Yes, it is." They're like, "I am Spock, I am Vulcan. You have to be serious, and you have to do the eyebrow thing without moving." Like, that was cool. And I thought Ortega actually did a good job at the eyebrow thing. That scene was kind of humorous, but a lot of the other Spock being human thing, I wasn't a huge fan of it. As I said, like the concept was okay, and they could have been good had the plot been something different. So my rating for this episode. This is something that's evolving that I have to think about. I think I'm gonna give this episode a 5 out of 10 average, which would actually make this my least favorite episode of the entire show, because remember, I upped my rating of episode 3 from a 4 to a 6. So previously the lowest rating I gave was a 6. There was a couple episodes in season 1 I gave a 6 to as well. But this I'm going lower. I'm going a 5. Even though there were some humorous moments, there's some character moments I liked between Nurse Chapel. I liked the some funny stuff with the charades and the beanie hiding the hat, and I liked the moment at the end with Spock appreciating his mother. I thought that was a heartfelt, emotional payoff. But I think all of that's overshadowed by how cliche and dumb that the whole evil stepmom, or not stepmom, I keep saying stepmom, mother-in-law, the evil mother-in-law trope, and the praying just walking off, and the whole Chapel Spock thing I'm just really iffy about as well, even though sometimes in this episode it's played well. It's just like, how? Like, they should have called this character something else. They just should have. Plain and simple. And yeah, the goofiness of him being human, I don't think was done very well, and I think there was a lot of the humor fell flat, even though there's a few times that it worked for me. I think for the most part, I just really didn't find this episode as funny as Spock Amok. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to 5 for this episode. So that is it for my review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 Episode 5. We'll be back next week to cover Episode 6. Also check out my channel as I'm covering Star Trek Next Generation episode by episode, and also doing many other videos on Star Trek and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.